In the early 1840s, cities were very different from what we know today. Streets were crowded, noisy, dirty, and often dangerous. There were no traffic lights, no clear sidewalks like we have now, and no modern rules to control how people moved. Horses, carts, wagons, children, street sellers, and pedestrians all shared the same narrow space. City leaders believed one thing very strongly: order was everything. They believed that if people moved in a controlled, predictable way, society would be safer, cleaner, and more civilized. This belief led to many strange rules. Some of these rules made sense, many did not. And one of the strangest was a law that made it illegal to walk backwards on the sidewalk. To modern people, this sounds ridiculous. Why would stepping backwards be a crime? But in the 1840s, this law was taken seriously. To understand why, we need to understand how people thought back then. Life in 1840s cities. By the 1840s, cities in the United States and Europe were growing fast. Factories were opening, workers were moving in from rural areas, immigration was increasing. Streets became crowded very quickly. Sidewalks were not wide or smooth. Many were uneven stone, wood planks, or packed dirt. A single mistake could cause someone to fall into a horse's path or under a wagon wheel. City governments were terrified of chaos. They believed that small behaviors could cause big problems. A person stopping suddenly could cause a pileup. Someone walking the wrong way could block traffic. Someone acting strangely could start a panic. Walking backwards was seen as strange behavior. To us, walking backwards is harmless, but in the 1840s, it was seen as unsafe, disruptive, and suspicious. People walking backwards could bump into others, knock over baskets, trip elderly people, or cause accidents with horses. More importantly, walking backwards broke the idea of forward progress, which society valued deeply at that time. Forward meant progress, industry, civilization. Backward meant disorder, madness, rebellion. Yes, even something as small as stepping backwards had symbolic meaning. The fear of public nuisance. In the 19th century, cities used a legal concept called public nuisance. This meant any behavior that disrupted public order, even if it didn't hurt anyone directly. Public nuisance laws were very broad. They covered standing too long in one place, blocking walkways, loud talking, strange movements. Walking backwards could fall under this category. If a police officer thought your behavior looked suspicious or disruptive, that was enough. Who made these laws? These laws were usually passed by city councils, town boards, or local magistrates. They were not debated like modern laws. Many were written quickly and enforced strictly. Most lawmakers were wealthy, older, conservative, and obsessed with discipline. They believed the working class needed control, not freedom. To them, a sidewalk was not a place for personal expression. It was a place for orderly movement. Who was most affected? The people most likely to be punished under these laws were poor workers, immigrants, children, and street performers. Walking backwards could happen accidentally: a worker backing up with a load, a child playing, a person avoiding a puddle. But police rarely cared about intent. Intent didn't matter. Obedience did. Policing in the 1840s. Police forces were new and aggressive. Officers were encouraged to enforce moral behavior, control crowds, and stop anything unusual. If an officer saw someone walking backwards, it could be interpreted as mocking authority, drunken behavior, or mental instability. This gave police full power to intervene. Punishments for breaking the law. Punishment depended on the city, but usually included a fine, temporary detention, or public warning. Even small fines were serious. Many workers lived day to day. A fine might mean no food, no rent, no heating. This made people extremely careful about how they moved in public. You might ask, why didn't people protest this law? The answer is simple. People were used to control. In the 1840s, children were beaten at school. Workers had almost no rights. Women had little legal power. A law about walking backwards seemed small compared to everything else. Most people followed rules silently. The bigger picture. This law was not about walking backwards. It was about control, visibility, and obedience. Cities wanted citizens to move predictably, act normally, and never stand out. Walking backwards stood out, and standing out was dangerous.
By the mid-1840s, several growing cities began writing very specific rules about how people could move in public spaces. These rules did not always appear in national law books. Instead, they were often written into city ordinances, local regulations meant to control daily life. This is where the rule against walking backwards on sidewalks quietly appeared. Cities that enforced movement rules. Large and fast-growing cities were the most strict. These included New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and London. These cities shared the same problems: overcrowding, immigration, noise, and fear of disorder. Sidewalks were considered public property, and governments believed they had the right to control how bodies moved on them. Walking backwards was grouped with other improper movements. How the law was written. The law rarely said, "Walking backwards is illegal." Instead, it used phrases like improper use of or use of the public way, obstructing pedestrian traffic, or unusual or disorderly movement. Walking backwards fit all three. This vague wording gave police full discretion. If an officer decided your movement was improper, that was enough. Why vagueness was intentional. Lawmakers did this on purpose. Clear laws limit power. Vague laws expand it. Police could stop anyone, at any time, for almost any reason. This was especially useful for controlling poor neighborhoods. Newspapers from the 1840s. Old newspapers give us clues about how these laws worked. Short reports often appeared in local papers describing arrests for disorderly conduct, improper use of the pavement, or public nuisance behavior. Details were rarely given, but some accounts mention backing into passers-by or moving against the natural flow. This strongly suggests walking backwards was included. Real encounters with police. Imagine this situation in 1846. A worker is carrying a crate. He steps backward to avoid a horse. He bumps into someone. A police officer sees this. The officer does not ask questions. He does not care about the reason. The behavior alone is enough. The worker can be stopped, questioned, fined, sometimes arrested. Why police focused on small actions. Modern people expect police to focus on serious crimes. In the 1840s, policing was different. Police were guardians of moral order, not just safety. They believed small actions led to big problems. Stopping minor behavior was seen as preventing chaos. Walking backwards was a sign of carelessness, disobedience, or lack of discipline. That was unacceptable. Children and street performers. Children were frequent targets. Kids played in the streets. They walked backward during games. They mimicked adults. Police saw this as bad influence. Street performers were also targeted. Some performers walked backward as part of tricks or comedy. Authorities hated street performance. It attracted crowds. Crowds scared lawmakers. Walking backwards became a reason to shut performances down. The flow of the sidewalk. In the 1840s, cities became obsessed with flow. Movement had to be forward, smooth, and predictable. Anything breaking this flow was treated as dangerous. Walking backwards disrupted eye contact, body rhythm, and social expectations. People could not predict what you would do next. Unpredictability was the real crime. Class and control. Rich citizens were rarely punished. Poor citizens were punished often. If a rich man stepped backward, it was ignored. If a poor man did it, it became a violation. This law was less about movement and more about who was allowed to exist freely in public. Public reaction. Most people did not laugh at this law. They feared it. They adjusted their behavior. People learned to look forward, move quickly, and avoid attention. Public space became a place of quiet obedience. Why no one wrote it down clearly. Many of these laws disappeared later because they were never written clearly. They lived in police practice, local custom, and court assumptions. When cities modernized, these rules quietly faded away. No repeal, no apology, just silence. The meaning behind the law. This law was not silly to the people enforcing it. It was a tool to control crowds, shape behavior, and enforce obedience. Walking backwards was only the excuse.
In the 1840s, strange behavior was not seen as harmless. It was seen as dangerous. Society believed that abnormal actions were signs of a deeper problem, often connected to the mind. Walking backwards was not just inconvenient, it was considered unnatural. To understand why, we must look at how people in the 19th century understood the human mind. Mental health beliefs in the 1800s. Modern psychology did not exist. People believed the mind worked like a machine. If someone behaved oddly, it meant something inside was broken. Doctors and scholars used terms like moral insanity, nervous disorder, degenerate behavior. These were not medical diagnoses as we know them today. They were judgments. Walking backwards fit easily into these categories. The fear of madness in public spaces. Cities feared one thing more than crime: public madness. A person behaving strangely could frighten others, start rumors, cause panic. Walking backwards caught attention immediately. People would stare. Whispers would begin. Fear would spread. Authorities wanted to stop this before it started. Order as a sign of sanity. In the 1800s, sanity was connected to orderly movement. A healthy person walked forward, followed crowds, obeyed routines. Anything else raised suspicion. Walking backwards suggested confusion, loss of control, rejection of social norms. This was enough to involve police. Doctors supported these beliefs. Early medical writers warned about irregular motion. They believed strange movements were symptoms of nervous collapse, alcohol abuse, moral failure. These ideas influenced lawmakers. If doctors said unusual movement was dangerous, the law followed. Backward movement and superstition. Superstition also played a role. In many cultures, backward movement was linked to bad luck. Walking backward symbolized reversing fate. It was associated with curses and rituals. Even in modernizing cities, old beliefs survived. A person walking backwards felt unsettling. Asylums and the fear of contagion. Mental illness was feared as contagious, not biologically, but socially. People believed strange behavior could spread through imitation. Authorities worried that children would copy it. Crowds would mimic it. Order would collapse. Walking backwards was stopped quickly to prevent this. Women and backward behavior. Women faced even stricter judgment. A woman walking backward could be accused of improper behavior, lack of modesty, or mental instability. Women were expected to move carefully, quietly, and forward. Deviation was punished faster. The role of religion. Religious ideas also influenced thinking. Forward movement symbolized progress, God's plan, moral direction. Backward movement symbolized sin, regression, chaos. Even without saying it, the law reflected these beliefs. Police reports and language. Police reports often used phrases like acting strangely, moving in an unnatural manner, or displaying erratic motion. These vague terms often included walking backwards. Once written, the label stuck. From behavior to criminality. The dangerous idea was this: strange behavior equals danger. This logic allowed cities to criminalize movement, appearance, expression. Walking backwards was just one example. Why this matters? This law shows how easily fear becomes policy, behavior becomes crime, difference becomes disorder. It was never about safety alone. It was about control.
Not everyone accepted the rule quietly. While most people adjusted their behavior out of fear or habit, a small number chose to defy it. Some did so out of frustration. Others did it deliberately as a form of quiet resistance. Walking backwards became, for a few, a way to challenge authority. Why some people walked backwards on purpose? There were several reasons people chose to do it intentionally: to mock unnecessary laws, to protest police power, to perform comedy or street acts, to test how far authority could go. These people were rare but memorable. They stood out in a society that demanded conformity. Satire in the streets. In the 1840s, satire was a common form of protest. Newspapers, pamphlets, and public performances often mocked authority using humor. Some performers walked backwards through busy streets to attract attention, expose how absurd the rule was, and show how quickly police reacted. The response was usually immediate. Police reaction to defiance. Police did not laugh. To them, mockery was dangerous. Someone walking backwards on purpose was not just breaking a rule, they were challenging authority. Officers often responded with immediate arrest, harsh language, and public humiliation. This sent a message to others. Silent resistance. Most resistance was not public. Some people took a few backward steps quietly, did it late at night, avoided crowded areas. These small acts gave people a sense of control in a controlled world. Even tiny freedoms mattered. Artists and performers. Street performers were natural rebels. Some included backward walking in mime acts, physical comedy, and visual tricks. Authorities shut these down quickly. Crowds were dangerous. Laughter was unpredictable. Intellectual criticism. Some writers criticized these laws indirectly. They wrote essays questioning why movement was controlled, why harmless actions were punished, why obedience mattered more than reason. They rarely mentioned the law directly, but the message was clear. Class-based rebellion. Wealthy people resisted differently. They complained in private, used connections to avoid punishment, and mocked the law socially. Poor people faced real consequences. Resistance was riskier. Why protest failed? The backward walking protest never became a movement. Reasons include fear of punishment, lack of organization, and bigger problems in Dale's life. People were struggling to survive. A sidewalk law was not worth jail. The power of embarrassment. Public punishment worked. Being stopped by police in front of others caused shame. Most people preferred compliance to embarrassment. Authority understood this very well. The law as a test. The rule acted as a test. If the public accepted this, they would accept more, and they did. What defiance revealed. Those who walked backwards showed something important. The law was not natural. It was learned, and it could be questioned, even if quietly.
Strange laws rarely end with drama. There was no public announcement, no apology, no official repeal ceremony. The rule against walking backwards on sidewalks did not end because people demanded freedom. It ended because the world changed. The rise of modern cities. By the late 1800s, cities began to modernize rapidly. Streets were paved, sidewalks were widened, traffic systems improved, public lighting increased. Movement became safer and more predictable. The original reason for strict control weakened. Professionalization of policing. Early police forces focused on moral behavior. Later police forces focused on theft, violence, and serious crime. Minor movement violations became less important. Police no longer had the time or public support to enforce tiny rules. Changing views on freedom. The idea of personal freedom grew stronger. People began to believe not all strange behavior is dangerous. Not all disorder leads to chaos. The public space belongs to everyone. Walking backwards started to look harmless. Medical understanding improved. Psychology and medicine advanced. Doctors slowly stopped labeling unusual movement as madness. Strange behavior became something to understand, not punish. This removed one of the strongest justifications for the law. The law was forgotten, not removed. Many local ordinances were never updated. They stayed written but unenforced. Over time, officers forgot them, courts ignored them, citizens stopped worrying. The law faded into irrelevance. Why nobody missed it? The law did not protect anyone. It created fear, not safety. Once gone, life improved quietly. People didn't celebrate its removal because they barely noticed it. Other laws that disappeared the same way. This rule was not unique. Many strange laws vanished silently. Bans on public laughter, restrictions on standing still, rules about eye contact. They ended not by protest but by neglect. Modern reactions. When people hear about this law today, they laugh. But laughter hides something important. These laws were real. They were enforced. They affected lives. What this law teaches us. This law shows how fear shapes rules, how control hides behind safety, how ordinary actions can become crimes. It reminds us that laws are human creations, not natural truths. The sidewalk as a symbol. The sidewalk seems simple, but in the 1840s it was a battlefield between freedom and order, between individuality and conformity, between progress and fear. Walking forward was obedience, walking backward was resistance. The final lesson. This law is gone, but the thinking behind it still appears in new forms. Every generation decides what behavior is acceptable, what is suspicious, what must be controlled. The past warns us to choose carefully.
The 1840s were full of strange rules, not just about walking backwards. Many of these laws seem absurd today, but at the time they reflected society's fears, beliefs, and desire for control. Studying them gives us context for the sidewalk law. Number 1. Bans on certain facial expressions. Some cities had rules about how people could show emotions in public. Frowning or scowling could be punished. Laughing loudly in certain districts was forbidden. Authorities feared that visible emotions could incite disorder or conflict. Like the backward walking law, these laws targeted behavior that seemed abnormal or disruptive. Number 2. Restrictions on children's play. Children were heavily regulated in public. Running in streets could result in fines. Playing with balls or toys near markets was illegal. Even skipping or hopping was sometimes forbidden. The reasoning was simple. Children could cause chaos, accidents could happen, and adults were expected to maintain control. Walking backwards fit neatly into this fear, as it too involved unpredictable movement. Number 3. Dress codes and appearance laws. Cities often regulated clothing. Bright colors or unusual patterns were sometimes forbidden. Hats had to follow local style rules. Women and men were expected to dress modestly and uniformly. The law against stepping backwards mirrored these rules. Anything that deviated from the norm was suspicious. Number 4. Movement and traffic rules. Before modern traffic control, people had to stay on one side of the street or sidewalk. Crossing paths with carts or horses incorrectly could be illegal. Running, spinning, or walking backward in public could be fined. The sidewalk law is part of this broader obsession with controlling physical movement in urban spaces. Number 5. Laws targeting street performers. Street performers were often under scrutiny. Juggling, acrobatics, or dance without permission could be punished. Playing instruments loudly in public could be a violation. Even small tricks that attracted attention risked fines. Walking backwards was sometimes associated with performance, giving authorities another reason to punish it. Why so many laws seem ridiculous today? From a modern perspective, these rules look silly, but context is important. Cities were crowded and dangerous. Police wanted predictability in behavior. Social norms were strict, and deviation caused fear. Many weird laws were attempts to protect safety, even if the approach was extreme. Patterns across cities. A closer look at the 1840s shows patterns. 1. Control. Laws regulated movement, appearance, and behavior. 2. Predictability. Anything unusual was seen as a potential threat. 3. Enforcement. Police had broad discretion. 4. Fear. Rules often reflected fear of disorder rather than harm. Walking backwards was unusual, unsafe, unpredictable, and therefore criminal. The role of newspapers. Newspapers in the 1840s often reported minor infractions, short notices about people being fined or arrested, headlines describing strange behavior on city streets, warnings for citizens to comply with ordinances. These reports reinforced the idea that order was necessary. Citizens read them and learned to conform. Public compliance. Most people complied quietly. They learned to walk forward, follow the crowd, and avoid attention. Even if the law seemed unfair, fear of punishment was enough to enforce obedience. Resistance was rare. When someone defied these laws, it was often a calculated risk. Street performers used humor to test boundaries. Intellectuals mocked vague ordinances in essays or newspapers. Ordinary citizens sometimes broke the law quietly when no one watched. Resistance existed, but the culture of fear kept it limited. The lesson of forgotten laws. By studying these forgotten laws, we see that societies often punish the unusual. Fear of chaos can create extreme regulations, and over time, most absurd laws fade quietly, leaving only stories for historians. Walking backwards on a sidewalk is now harmless, but it once symbolized danger, disorder, and rebellion.
By the late 19th century, cities had begun changing in ways that made old rules like the sidewalk law unnecessary. This process was gradual but transformative, reshaping both urban spaces and societal expectations. Urban planning begins. As cities grew, planners began to design streets and sidewalks with safety and movement in mind. Sidewalks became wider and smoother, reducing tripping hazards. Street corners were redesigned to separate pedestrians from horse-drawn wagons. Lighting improved, making night travel safer. With safer streets, the original rationale for punishing backward walking disappeared. Accidents caused by unusual movement became less common. Traffic management and rules. By the 1880s and 1890s, cities introduced sidewalk etiquette guides, early traffic signals, and signs directing pedestrian flow. These innovations created natural order without criminalizing minor behavior. Walking backward was no longer seen as a threat, it became just another pedestrian choice. Shift in police focus. Police forces also evolved, from moral enforcers to public safety officers. Minor infractions were deprioritized. Crime prevention became the main concern. Old laws like the backward walking rule were ignored. Enforcement simply stopped. Cultural shifts. Society's view of individual behavior changed. People began to believe that strange behavior was harmless. Personal freedom became more valued. Fear of disorder decreased as communities became more structured and predictable. Walking backward, once a symbol of defiance or madness, was now considered normal experimentation or play. Education and public awareness. As education spread, citizens learned to read and understand laws better. Knowledge of legal rights increased. People began questioning the fairness of outdated ordinances. This intellectual growth contributed to the decline of obscure laws. People realized that small acts like stepping backward did not endanger society. Technology's role. Technological changes also helped. Horse-drawn wagons were gradually replaced by trams and automobiles with more predictable traffic flow. Street paving and lighting made sidewalks safer and easier to navigate. Communication improvements allowed cities to issue public notices instead of relying on arbitrary enforcement. Modern streets created predictable environments, reducing the need for minor control laws. Legal revisions. In many cities, old ordinances were quietly revised or removed. City councils updated outdated rules. Obsolete laws were omitted from new municipal codes. Police manuals no longer included minor infractions like walking backward. Most of these changes were administrative, not dramatic. Few people noticed. Psychological and medical progress. By the early 20th century, medical understanding of human behavior improved. Abnormal actions were increasingly seen as harmless or understandable. Strange behavior was no longer automatically labeled a threat. Walking backward was simply an unusual action, not a symptom of insanity. Cultural acceptance. Cultural attitudes shifted as well. Children played more freely in public spaces. Street performances were tolerated or regulated rather than banned. People experimented with movement in public without fear of punishment. The sidewalk, once a controlled space, became a place for freedom of movement. The slow fade of the law. Unlike dramatic repeals, the sidewalk law faded through neglect. Few officers remembered it. Courts rarely referenced it. Citizens forgot it existed. The law lived on only in archives, waiting to be rediscovered by curious historians. Lessons from the disappearance. The story of this law teaches several lessons. 1. Laws reflect fear and control, not always safety. 2. Societal change can render laws irrelevant. 3. Cultural, technological, and legal evolution gradually replaces unnecessary restrictions. 4. Minor infractions can serve as examples of broader power dynamics. Walking backward is harmless today, but in the 1840s it was a tool for enforcing order.
While the law against walking backwards may seem minor today, it had real consequences for people in the 1840s. Some were fined, others were publicly humiliated, a few were even briefly detained. These stories illustrate how serious cities were about enforcing order. A worker in New York, 1845.
A common example comes from New York City. A young worker named Thomas was carrying a crate of goods on a busy street. To avoid a horse-drawn wagon, he stepped backward briefly. A police officer noticed. Thomas was stopped immediately. He was fined several cents, a small sum but enough to affect a poor worker. He was publicly admonished in front of pedestrians. The report in the New York Daily Times emphasized the dangerous and disruptive act, showing how seriously even minor infractions were treated. A child in Boston, 1846. In Boston, children were frequently targeted. A group of boys were playing near a market. One child began to walk backward, hopping slightly. A local officer fined him for disorderly movement in the public way. The city viewed children's play as a potential source of chaos. The fines were meant to teach obedience and order. Parents often paid the fines quietly, warning their children not to repeat the behavior. Street performers in Philadelphia. Philadelphia had a thriving street performance culture. Performers often included acrobatics and backward walking in their routines. Police saw these acts as dangerous distractions. Performers could be fined or removed from the streets. Crowds were considered threats to public order. Local newspapers sometimes reported arrests as prevention of public disorder. Even harmless entertainment could be criminalized when it involved backward movement. Public reactions. While authorities enforced the law strictly, ordinary people had mixed feelings. Some accepted the rule silently. Others saw it as ridiculous but complied out of fear. A few quietly mocked the enforcement. The law became a tool to control not only behavior, but also social hierarchy. Wealthier citizens were rarely punished, while poor workers or children bore the consequences. Newspaper accounts and reports. Local newspapers provide key evidence about enforcement. Articles described individuals as moving contrary to natural order. Headlines often warned citizens to maintain forward movement on streets. Reports rarely explained why backward walking was punished, only that it disrupted public safety. These accounts demonstrate how serious minor infractions were treated in society at that time. Punishments beyond fines. In some cities, more than fines were imposed. Short-term detention, public shaming, warnings recorded in police logs. Even brief detentions carried social consequences. People feared humiliation in front of neighbors or employers. Resistance and humor. Some individuals resisted cleverly. Street performers turned backward walking into a comedic act. Children experimented in hidden alleys or parks. Adults mocked the law in conversation or satirical essays. While these actions rarely caused legal change, they showed that human creativity found ways around strict rules. A wider pattern. Walking backward was just one example. Other minor behaviors like yawning loudly, whistling after dark, or chewing gum in public were also criminalized in various cities. The sidewalk law represents a larger obsession with control, illustrating fear of disorder, desire for predictability, protection of social norms. It also highlights how the law disproportionately affected certain groups, including the poor, children, and performers. Lessons from individual stories. From these stories, we can see 1. The law was enforced, not ignored. 2. Minor behavior could carry serious consequences. 3. Social hierarchy influenced enforcement. 4. Humor and subtle resistance existed even under strict rules. These lessons show that what seems trivial today could have real impacts on daily life in the past.
Walking backwards may seem like a small, even silly act, yet in the 1840s it carried meaning far beyond the sidewalk. Writers, thinkers, and ordinary citizens often viewed movement as symbolic, reflecting morality, progress, and social order. Walking backwards in literature and culture. Books, essays, and newspapers of the time frequently mentioned unusual movement. Walking backwards was described as a sign of confusion or madness, a reflection of disorder in society, a challenge to authority. For example, some writers compared backward walking to reversing time or rejecting progress. In a society obsessed with forward movement, industry, urban expansion, moral improvement, backward motion became a symbol of regression. Philosophical interpretations. Philosophers and moralists often connected behavior to virtue and social responsibility. They argued proper conduct reinforced stability. Deviating from norms threatened the community. Even small actions like stepping backward reflected inner character. Walking backward was more than an act, it was a reflection of societal fear and moral judgment. Public fascination. Odd laws, like this one, sparked curiosity and debate. People discussed them in letters to newspapers. Satirical essays mocked overly strict rules. Some used backward walking in performance art or demonstrations. The act itself became a conversation starter, highlighting society's obsession with control. The law as a reflection of its time. This law reveals much about 1840s cities. Fear of disorder. Any unpredictable behavior was dangerous. Obsession with conformity. Society demanded predictable movement. Power of authority. Laws enforce hierarchy and obedience. Symbolic thinking. Small actions represented larger moral or social concerns. It was not just about walking backward, it was about who controlled public life and how. The human element. Stories from newspapers, journals, and court records show how this law affected real people. Poor workers navigating busy streets, children playing and being punished for curiosity, street performers fined for harmless tricks. Each story illustrates the tension between individual freedom and societal expectation. Lessons for modern audiences. Though the law is gone, it leaves several lessons. Minor rules can have major impacts. What seems trivial may deeply affect daily life. Fear shapes policy. Societal fears often create unnecessary regulations. Control versus freedom. Authority often enforces order at the cost of individuality. Culture matters. Symbols, norms, and perceptions drive behavior as much as laws. These lessons remain relevant today, reminding us to question why certain behaviors are restricted. Why this law still fascinates. Even now, this law sparks curiosity because it is unexpected. Who imagines stepping backward being illegal? Illustrative. Shows how society used fear to control citizens. Entertaining. There's a subtle humor in imagining officers policing backward steps. Educational. It teaches history, urban development, psychology, and social control simultaneously. Final thoughts. The law against walking backward on sidewalks was never about safety alone. It was a tool for shaping society, enforcing obedience, and reflecting the fears of its time. From crowded streets in New York and Boston to the reports of punished children and performers, the law left an imprint on daily life. It reminded citizens that even minor behavior mattered and that society demanded conformity. By studying such forgotten laws, we understand how fear, culture, and authority interact. We also learn how cities evolve, how societies relax control, and how human creativity quietly resists strict rules. Closing reflection. Today, walking backwards is harmless, often playful, and even entertaining, but in the 1840s it was a symbol of danger, rebellion, and disorder. This history invites us to reflect on our own time. Which current laws enforce order unnecessarily? How does fear shape rules today? Are we, like 19th century citizens, following regulations without questioning them? The story of walking backward on sidewalks reminds us that history is alive in everyday actions and that even small movements can reveal much about society, power, and human behavior.